Our movie starts with CJ Walker and her friend Sebastian as they're recording themselves trying their new homemade time machine for the 103rd time as they're planning to go back to yesterday. Get it? Go back to yesterday? Huh. God, I love time travel. And they start the machine that's strapped to their backpack, but it fails to turn on and it catches fire. And today's the last day of school for CJ and Sebastian, who are planning to showcase their experiment on the Science Expo. And if they win the expo, they'll be able to get into any university that they want. And after they finish their class, they meet up with Eduardo, Sebastian's friend, and CJ finds him very annoying because Eduardo clearly has a crush on her and he keeps asking her out. And CJ doesn't really care because all she wants to do is just do her science experiment and go to a good university. Yeah. And Eduardo invites them to come to Puerto Rico for the summer, and CJ just ignores the invitation and she leaves with Sebastian. And in a bit, we see CJ and Sebastian go to a mini-mart to get some snacks. And there they run into CJ's ex, Jared. And Jared was there with his new girlfriend, and he asks CJ if she misses him. And this is the crazy part where he taunts her about how she used to be so in love with him and she used to beg for his D all the time. I mean, who does that in a mini-mart? Teenagers are wild, bruh. And CJ calls him a liar, and she pushes him out of the mini-mart, but when Jared tries to push back, her big brother Calvin gets in front of him and he scares Jared away. And CJ is annoyed that Calvin intervened on her behalf, and she tells him that she doesn't need his help. She can take care of her own fights. And then they start arguing about it, and Calvin says that he only intervenes because CJ can't control her temper, and she does have a temper, a bad one. And while they were arguing, two cops come and ask if everything is okay, and they seem a little too aggressive. And they ask for Calvin's ID, and then CJ asks if they asked for Francis Pierre's ID before shooting him. And Francis Pierre was a young teenager who was shot by the cops claiming that he had a weapon when he really didn't. And the cops then feel embarrassed by this question and they just leave them alone. Moving on, then we see CJ and Sebastian leave to go to Sebastian's grandparents' house to work on their time machine again. And they finally figure out to give more energy to the machine, and then they set a plan to try it tomorrow. And that night, CJ gets home late, but she still has to do her chores. And her brother Calvin joins her, and he apologizes for how he acted earlier. And they start talking about their dad, and they start to get emotional. And Calvin tells his sister that he only feels the need to watch out for her because their dad is dead now, and there isn't really anybody around that takes care of them. They have to take care of themselves. And their father was a soldier who died a few years back, and Calvin still wears his tag every day. It's obvious that both CJ and her brother miss their dad very much, and this scene just describes how alone that they feel without him. And the next day, CJ and Sebastian try to time travel for the 104th time, and says they fixed their previous errors, and this time, when they start their time machine, it actually works, and they both get transported to the previous day right before they went to the mini-mart. And they get pretty excited by the fact that it worked, and they go around asking everybody what day it is because they just can't believe it happened. And they only have about 10 minutes left before their time travel expires, so they have to do what they plan to do within those 10 minutes. And they go to the mini-mart, and Sebastian tells CJ that they can't be seen by their other selves because that would break the space-time continuum. And at the mini-mart, they run into Jared again, and CJ throws a drink at him. And they run away from him after, and when he tries to catch up to them, he gets hit by a car, but thankfully it was just a strain on his arm and he's gonna be okay. And he's a jerk, so he kinda deserves it. And at this point, their time runs out and CJ and Sebastian go back to the present. And Sebastian is pretty mad at CJ because she acted really recklessly, because throwing the drink at Jared was really the wrong move because that could bring about outcomes that they can never predict. And he tells her that Jared could have been killed because of her recklessness, and she tells him to relax because nothing bad happened yet. I'm not saying something bad is gonna happen, but hey, let's just continue watching. And later, in the present, we see Calvin, who was going home with a friend, and two black guys run past them. And shortly after, a police car pulls up and they stop Calvin and his friends because these two cops think that these two are actually the robbers that they were chasing. And weirdly enough, Calvin ends up getting shot by the police and he dies. And this all happened because CJ and Sebastian's time traveling has changed the timeline somehow. And Calvin would have been okay if they didn't time travel, but because they did, now he's dead. And CJ couldn't take this, and she plans to time travel again to save her brother. And she figures out a way to time travel even further back in time, and she tells Sebastian about all this, and she tells him how she's gonna go back to save her brother. And when Sebastian hears this, he's not really pleased because she should know better. If she goes back in time time and she tries to alter what happened to her brother, she could bring about even worse outcomes in the present. And both CJ and Sebastian know this, but CJ really loves her brother and she feels like this is all her fault. And when Sebastian tells her this, she gets really mad and she tells him that he doesn't care because Calvin is not his brother. And then, as you can guess, they have a huge fight and they stop talking for a while. And by for a while, I mean just that night. Because next morning, she just goes back to Sebastian and she apologizes for how she acted and that he's right and stuff. And Sebastian actually agrees to her plan and he tells her that he's gonna help her time travel to save Calvin. So now, they've upgraded their machine and they can travel even further back in time. And this enables them to travel to when Calvin was shot. And now they have about 10 minutes to stop what happened to Calvin. But when they time travel to the point where Calvin was shot, Jared and his gang see them and they start chasing after them because CJ actually threw that drink at him back when she time traveled for the first time and he got hurt because of her. And as CJ and Sebastian were trying to run away from Jared and his gang, their 10 minutes run out and they go back to the present without saving Calvin. It's kind of weird saying going back to the present. It's not like you're going to the past, but so now, in the present, CJ decides to travel even further back in time and stop the robbery before it actually happens. Because if she can stop the robbery, there won't be cops chasing after robbers and her brother will be alive because there will be no cops who mistake him to be a thief. Basically, yeah, I feel like you guys understand me. But CJ has a problem here. In order to travel that further back in time, she needs bigger energy capacitors, and she doesn't currently have those. And here, Sebastian tells CJ that they can get the energy capacitors from Eduardo. And Eduardo has big energy capacitors because that was his science fair project. And they go and ask Eduardo for the energy capacitors, and he asks them why they need it. And they tell him that it's a secret, and they can't really tell him the reason. And he tells them that he can't really give them anything unless they tell him why, and then CJ agrees to go out with him on a date. And this guy does not bat an eye. He's like, okay, fine, I'll just give it to you. Just go out with me. And now, finally, they've acquired their energy capacitor. And they add it to their machine and they start working on it all night so that it can actually give them the boost that they need to travel further back in time. And the next morning, they start their new and improved time machine and they travel to the bodega where the robbery happened, but they get there 10 minutes before the robbery took place. And once they get there, they call the cops and tell them that a robbery is about to happen, but the cops don't show up right away. And now they only have 5 minutes left to return to the present. And CJ gets very impatient by this, and she tells Sebastian that she's gonna go to the bodega and she's gonna tell the owner that he's about to get robbed herself. And Sebastian doesn't really like this idea, cause anything can happen, she can get hurt, the bodega guy can shoot her, who knows? But CJ doesn't see any other options and she just goes inside while Sebastian waits for her on the outside. And as she was going inside the bodega, the Sebastian from this timeline sees her and he follows her because she's wearing the time travel backpack without him. And he thinks that it's his CJ from his timeline. And when he asks her what's going on, she tells him to go back to his place and wait for her there and to leave the premises right away. And then she writes a note and she gives it to the owner of the bodega, telling him that 2 robbers are actually gonna, rob him. And they were already in the bodega and the owner pulls out a gun at them, but they also pull out a gun at him. And this guy was a bit of a wimp because he gets scared and he gives up his gun. And these guys start stealing from his cash register and they also ask CJ to give her backpack because they think there's something valuable in it. And when she says no and they struggle, Sebastian intervenes and he ends up getting shot. And outside, the Sebastian that time traveled with CJ was waiting for her to come out and he hears a gunshot. And when he looks down, he sees that he's shot in the stomach and he falls to the ground. And CJ tries to save the original Sebastian, the one that just got shot in the bodega. And as CJ was trying to do that, we see the Sebastian that just time traveled with her just disappearing. And he disappeared because the original Sebastian, who was in the past, has actually died. And to top things off, she's run out of time at this point and she time travels to the original timeline. And here, her brother is actually alive. Calvin's alive, but her best friend Sebastian is dead. And at Sebastian's funeral, Calvin finds all the videos that her and Sebastian made of them time traveling. And he asks her what's going on and what all these videos are about. And she tells him everything. And he tells her that he feels like he should be dead because there's some kind of residual feeling left in him that he shouldn't really be here. I guess that's how time travel works. And Calvin asks to help if maybe she wants to time travel with him to save Sebastian, and she tells him that she only has one transporter left, and she doesn't even have enough energy capacitors to travel back in time to save Sebastian and her brother Calvin, because when she saves Sebastian, Calvin could die this time. And so she decides to go to Eduardo, and she tells him everything about the time travel, about how Sebastian died, and after he heard the story, he decides to help her with everything he's got. And they upgrade the machine together, and CJ gets ready to leave. And Calvin finally gives her his dad's tag, and he tells her to save Sebastian and then stop him from getting killed by the cops. And CJ promises to save them both, and she time travels. And she time travels to yesterday before her and Sebastian time travel to save Calvin. And Sebastian at this point doesn't know that he's gonna die. And CJ and him go to her brother, and they tell him that he's gonna get shot by the cops, and she actually shows him his funeral picture. And he just thinks that it's some kind of joke because it's very unbelievable when somebody tells you that you're gonna die and shows you a picture from the future. It's very confusing. And as she was trying to convince him of this, the police show up before he actually believes her. And the police get out of their car, they start harassing everybody, they drop everybody on the floor and they push them around. And Calvin gets up and he tries to take out his phone to record the whole police brutality video that we all do. Come on. You know the one. But before he can take out his phone, one of the cops mistakes it for a weapon, and he shoots Calvin multiple times, and he dies in front of CJ. And again, at this point, her 10 minutes run out, and she travels to the present again. But this time, Sebastian is alive, and Calvin is back to being dead. And Sebastian tells her that she can't keep doing this because even more people are gonna get hurt next time. And CJ agrees, but when Sebastian steps out of the garage, she locks him out, and Sebastian begs her not to do this because this girl is gonna time travel and try to save her brother again, causing more people to die, probably. And she tells him that she loves him, and for the final time, she time travels to yesterday again. And she sets her clock for 10 minutes, and she runs to save her brother. And will she do it? Will she save Calvin? Or will she just end up getting more people killed? We don't know, because this is where the movie ends. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting ending. What do you guys think? You think she's gonna screw things up some more, or do you think she manages to actually save both her brother and Sebastian? Leave your comments in the comment section. Also, like my video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys on the next recap. Bye.